Now, let's go then, please, if you would, to Genesis chapter 25. The title of the Sunday school lesson this morning is Father Abraham Had Many Sons. Now, how many of you remember that Sunday school song? I am here to tell you that is the worst Sunday school song ever invented. It is. Father Abraham, and I'm not going to sing it or do the actions for you, but Father Abraham had many sons of Father Abraham, and one of them so are you, so let's just praise the Lord. And then you're doing all these actions, and I never did it at church. I just hate it. But they loved it, the kids loved it, but I would never do it. It was too much work, for one thing. Anyway, I thought it would be a good title for our lesson this morning. Chapter 25 of Genesis, it's a hodgepodge. You've got everything in here. Usually, we've been studying through Genesis for almost a year now. And we go each chapter, and usually it's like a different theme. And of course, chapter 24 was just a wonderful, wonderful chapter speaking about Isaac as a type of Christ, and Rebecca as a type of the church, and so on, and all that God's doing in the world today. But we'll come to chapter 25, and there's just a whole bunch of stuff thrown in here. And it's really about Abraham and his sons and his grandsons, and it goes all the way from Abraham to Esau and Jacob. And so there's a lot in here, so we'll do our best to get through it. I have to say there's not any sort of really wonderful truth that sort of jumps out at us concerning the whole chapter. I think toward the end there's very important lessons, but let's just start with the first section in our notes. Abraham marries Keturah. And so let's read verses 1 to verse 4. It says, Then again, Abraham, and her name was Keturah, and she bare him Zimran, and Jokshan, and Medan, and Midian, and Ishbak, and Shua. And Jokshan begat Sheba and Dedan. And the sons of Dedan were Ashurim, and Letushim, and Leamim. I should have practiced these names. And the sons of Midian, Ephah, and Epher, and Hanok, and Abida, and Eldaah. All these were the children of Keturah. And Abraham gave all... Sorry, let's just stop there. So let's think about what's being said here in these first four verses. Now, Abraham is 140 years old now, and he's getting married again. I think that's sort of unusual in anybody's book, really. And, of course, all those years, the issue with Sarah being barren, obviously the problem wasn't with Abraham, because here with Keturah, he has 6 more sons. So in all, Abraham's going to have 8 sons, the first one being Ishmael, then Isaac, and then the 6 sons of Keturah. Now, Keturah is a little bit of a mystery, because we really don't know anything about this woman. We don't know how old she was. We don't know where she came from. We don't know what nationality she was. We do not know what happened to her after Abraham's death. They were basically... Abraham dies at 175, so they're married at 140, so they lived together for 35 years. And probably these 6 boys were born maybe in the first 10 years of that marriage. But we really don't know much about Keturah. Now, the word Keturah it's the Hebrew word Qatar, which is also is an Arabic word. And the Hebrew word Qatar means fragrance or perfume, or like incense, like smoke going up. Doesn't really tell us a whole lot about Keturah. Maybe she smelled nice, I don't know. But there is an interesting connection, I think, because there is a country in Saudi Arabia or over in that direction called Qatar. Qatar. It's in your notes here. There's a little map there. Of course, right to the east side of the Mediterranean there on the left top-hand corner. And then you'll see Saudi Arabia. Look how big Saudi Arabia is. It's quite a really big place. And of course, in Saudi Arabia, you'll need your binoculars, I think, to see all this. But you can see there Mecca and Medina. Those are the 2. Of course, I want to say Mecca is the first most holy site of Islam, and then Medina, and then Jerusalem, supposedly. But notice Qatar there. It's in the, I guess that's the Persian Gulf. It's that peninsula that goes up. And the capital is Doha. And some of you may see that new news channel, Al Jazeera. You've heard of that? It says an Islamic news agency, and that's based in Doha, in Qatar. Qatar is a very, very wealthy nation. If you look at some of the photographs, the skyscrapers and stuff, they're just loaded with oil. They're the third most plentiful nation in the world as far as oil and gas is concerned. But it's the same name, Keturah, and it might be that there's a connection between this woman in chapter 25, Keturah, and actually the nation of Qatar, because what we find is later on here is that Abraham basically gives gifts to these sons and sends them out eastward. And really they mix with the sons of Ishmael, which he mentions also in this chapter, and they are basically have become the people of Arabia, or the Arabs, the Arab nations. Okay, so there may be a connection between Keturah and the name Keturah and Qatar, because that may be her grandsons and sons and so on. So it's interesting again, I think, that Abraham marries at such age. Obviously, one of the interesting names there is Midian in verse number 4, the sons of Midian. And of course, that's where Moses got his wife, Zipporah. She was a Midianite. And also, all these peoples basically become enemies of Israel. And we'll see that later on with Esau and Jacob. So let's look at verse 5 and 6. It says, "And Abraham gave all that he had unto Isaac, but unto the sons of the concubines which Abraham had, Abraham gave gifts and sent them away from Isaac his son, while he yet lived eastward unto the east country." And of course, if you see where Canaan would be, then east of Canaan would be over in the Saudi Arabia, into that the peninsula of Arabia. "And these are the days of the years of Abraham's life which he lived, 160 years. And Abraham gave up the ghost." But before Abraham dies, he's trying to protect Isaac. There are a number of places through Scripture where, rival siblings will, in many cases they will kill their brother in order so that they can have the power and the wealth and so of that family. And Abraham was trying to protect Isaac here. So it says, "But unto the sons of the concubines," and the concubines there would be in reference to Hagar and Keturah, even though it says that Keturah is his wife. I think the concubines there are speaking about the two other women other than Sarah. When Abraham, as we'll see here in just a moment, dies, he's buried in the cave of Machpelah in Hebron, and he had already buried Sarah there. Okay, so that gravesite, you have Abraham and Sarah, you have Isaac and Rebekah, and you have Jacob and Leah, just those six. And so Keturah is not buried there, and Hagar is not buried there. And so really what he's saying is that Sarah was in a class all by herself. Sarah really was his wife, and Hagar and Keturah would have been considered concubines. And so that's what he's speaking here about in verse 6. But under the Abraham gave gifts and sent them away from Isaac his son. He didn't want any competition or any problems for Isaac. He just wanted these guys to be placated, contented, and sent away so that they wouldn't be a threat in any way to Isaac. And so Abraham was trying to look after Isaac. Why? Because he knew that the promises of God were through Isaac. It was not through Ishmael. And of course in Islam they reverse that, and Ishmael is the hero. They actually have Abraham sacrificing Ishmael in the land of Moriah rather than Isaac, and so they reverse all of that. Instead of the blessings going through Isaac and Jacob, and you remember all through the Bible he is the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, but they turn that to make Ishmael the blessings coming through Ishmael, which is not true. Now Ishmael was blessed, and we'll see that in just a moment. But the plan, the messianic line goes through Isaac. So Abraham's trying to protect that. And then Abraham dies in verse 7. "These are the days of the years of Abraham's life, which he lived 160 years." So 175 years. "Then Abraham gave up the ghost and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. And his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zoar, the Hittite, which is before Mamre, the field which Abraham purchased of the sons of Heth. There was Abraham buried, and Sarah his wife. So, of course, we spent over in chapter 23. It's all about the death of Sarah. And it says the same thing of Sarah in chapter 23, verse 1. And Sarah was 107 and 20 years old. She was 127 when she died. And these were the years of Sarah, of the life of Sarah. And so these were the years of Abraham. 175 years. He lived a good old age, an old man full of years. And then it says, and he was gathered to his people. Now that's a phrase that's used through the Old Testament. And it has nothing to do with, being buried in the family plot, because really the only person in that grave was Sarah. When it speaks about his people, it's speaking about his fathers, those who died in faith before Abraham. And it's a way of expressing that when a saved person dies, it's not that they cease to exist. It's not that they are not conscious. They are very much conscious, and they are gathered. They are gathered onto their people. Now, if you look over at Luke chapter 16, it's interesting. Jesus spoke about this place. He said to the thief on the cross, "Today thou shalt be with me in paradise." And there was a place where of people who were saved went, and Jesus called it paradise. And of course, he said to the thief, "Today thou shalt be with me in paradise." But in Luke 16, Jesus spoke about two men who died, and one was saved and one was not saved. It's the rich man and Lazarus. The rich man was not saved. Lazarus was saved. In verse 19 it says, there was a certain rich man which was clothed in purple and fine linen, and fared sumptuously every day. There was a certain beggar named Lazarus, which was laid at his gate full of sores, and desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. And it came to pass that the beggar died. Well, that's the end of it, right? Not according to Jesus. And do you think Jesus knows more about it than anybody alive or anybody who, he knows everything. And, it says, in my Father's house were many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. If it were not so, I would have told you. If it were not so, I would have told you. Jesus tells us the truth, and he tells the truth here. He is the truth. But it says, it came to pass that the beggar died and was carried, like Abraham, he was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. Now, this place called paradise actually ended up being named after Abraham's bosom. And the key character that Lazarus goes to is Abraham. In fact, if you read on here, it says that the rich man also died and was buried. Well, is that the end of, what about unsaved people who are not Christians? It says in verse 23, and in hell he lifted up his eyes. What eyes? He was buried. Well, it's maybe difficult for us to understand, but there's a way in which people, even though you're a soul and you live inside a body, that when you leave that body, you can still see, you can still hear, you can still feel. Lazarus also was able to feel and experience. In verse 23, and in hell he lifted up his eyes, being in torments, and seeth Abraham. So here's Abraham, afar off, and Lazarus in his. And so this place was a place of waiting. Hell was one compartment where people are waiting, and they're suffering that even now, but they're waiting until death and hell deliver up the dead which are in them. And every man will be judged according to his works, and whosoever is not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. So that's a waiting place. And then on the other side of this great gulf that he describes as this place called paradise, or Abraham's bosom, it is also a place of waiting. It was a place of waiting until the price of sin was eventually paid for. That happened 2,000 years ago when Jesus died on the cross. And the Bible says that Jesus led captivity captive. And he gave gifts unto men, Ephesians chapter 4. And he led captivity captive in the sense that because he paid the price in full, this place called paradise, Abraham's bosom, these Old Testament saints were waiting for the cross to happen, for the blood to be shed, for God to be satisfied, for atonement to take place. And once it was completely paid for, these people who had been waiting in this place called paradise, which is a Persian word which means pleasure garden, it's a happy place, but then they were delivered, and Jesus literally freed them and took them directly into the presence of God in heaven. And so paradise is now up instead of down, it's up. And so people who die now go directly into the presence of the Lord. To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. And we won't read this, but if you read further on, you'll see the conversation that the rich man has with Abraham. And of course, this is when Abraham went to that place here in Genesis 25 when he died. And it says that he was gathered to his people. It's interesting in verse 9 that his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him. Ishmael was basically thrown out when Isaac was 3 years old, but somehow they still have a relationship now, and both of them are here to bury their daddy. When Sarah died, Isaac wasn't mentioned. Of course, Ishmael wouldn't have been there anyway, because if anything, there would have been hard feelings, because Sarah was the one that threw his mother out. But it's interesting that even Isaac wasn't mentioned in chapter 23 because of what we were studying. He disappears from the time of his sacrifice until the time of his marrying. So even in that important event, and he may have been there, but he's not mentioned, okay, in order to keep that picture. Picturing Christ that he's missing from the time of his sacrifice until the time of his wedding. But here Ishmael and Isaac are there, and burying Abraham in the cave of Machpelah. And that's in Hebron. You can go to Israel today, you can go to that cave. You can go to that. There's it's an Islamic mosque. Part of it is an Islamic mosque. But the actual building was built by Herod the Great, who built the temple of Jesus' time. That dates back that far. So you can go to Hebron today in Israel and you can actually see this place where Abraham is buried. Okay, look at verse number 11. So after his marriage and these children to Keturah, and his taking care of Isaac and sending away Isaac's half-brothers, and now Abraham dies and is buried by Ishmael and Isaac. In verse 11, just one verse, and it says, "And it came to pass after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac dwelt by the well Lahairoi." So the messianic blessings and the covenant blessings upon Abraham are now, in a sense, why is verse 11 there? In a sense, God makes the point, after Abraham has died, the blessing now goes upon his son Isaac, not Ishmael, but Isaac. Remember now, he's the God, Jesus said he's the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And then he goes on to say that he's the God of the living, helping us to understand that Abraham and Isaac and Jacob are not dead. Well, they are dead in our understanding, but they are alive with God in his presence. Okay, so now can you remember where Abraham lived? Now Sarah died in Hebron, that's where they were buried. But where did they live? It was Beer somewhere. What does Beer mean? Well, okay. That's what it means. Beer means well. Beersheba. Do you remember what Sheba means? It means the oath. Do you remember the seven lambs? He gives them over 7 times so that who was it? Abimelech wouldn't forget this oath. So Beersheba was the well of the oath. So it was a well, it was an oasis, and that's where Abraham lived. And of course, when Isaac took Rebekah to his wife in chapter 24, he takes her back to his mother's tent. Again, it's a picture, Jesus said, in my Father's house, and Jesus will come for his bride and will take us back to the Father's house. But he only lives there for a short period of time. And then he moves. Look what it says in verse 11. God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac dwelt by the well Lahairoi. This is Beer Lahairoi, and that is the well of the living one who sees me. Now the person who named that was actually Ishmael's mother, Hagar. Do you remember? When she first went out, and she was pregnant at that point, and the Lord met her, and for the first time in her life she realized that God was not just the God of Abraham, the most important person, but God was the God of the little Egyptian handmaid, and God was no respecter of persons. And she had a personal encounter with God there. And what she realized was, here's the well, Beer Lahairoi, of the living one who sees me. And for the first time she realized that God was interested in her, that God was looking upon her. And that's what the well was named after, the living God who sees me. And then she says, do I look after him who sees me? And of course God told her to go back and to submit herself, and she did so. And but anyway, that place became a special place for Isaac. Do you remember when he was waiting for Rebekah? He left the father's house and he went into the south country and he came to Beer Lahai. And that's where he met Rebekah as they came from the east. And of course in chapter 24 you have the whole idea where he lifted up his eyes and saw. Then she lifted up her eyes and saw the well of the living one who sees me. And I think it's indicative of the place where the bridegroom meets the bride, where Jesus Christ meets us in the air, and he shall see us, and we shall see him for the first time, and our eyes will meet for the first time. You remember now, Rebekah said yes to a husband that she'd never seen before, she'd never met before. And we say the same thing when we choose Christ as our Savior. We have never met Christ, we have never seen Christ. The first time we will see him is in the rapture, when we see him face to face. Unless you obviously die first, then you'll see him. But so Isaac is blessed, and he makes that point here, and he then moves home to Beer Lahai, the well Lahai, and that's where Isaac then dwells from then on out. Then in verse 12 through 18, it talks about Ishmael and his sons and Ishmael's death. So these are like the generations. And as you go through Genesis, you'll find these places where it talks about the generations of Noah and the generations of Abraham and the generations of Ishmael, the generations of Isaac. And it's really like a family tree that it could have been written down. There may have been copies of that Moses, who wrote Genesis, would have had access to, and he incorporated that into the text of the scripture. So let's look at verse 12 through verse 18. It says, "Now these are the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's handmaid, bare unto Abraham. And these are the names of the sons of Ishmael by their names according to their generations. The firstborn of Ishmael, Nebajoth, and Kedar, and Adbeel, and Mibsam, and Mishma, and Duma, and Massa, Hadar, and Tema, Jatur, Naphish, and Kedema. These are the sons of Ishmael." Ishmael had 12 sons, kind of like Jacob had 12 sons. 12 sons of Israel, 12 tribes of Israel. And Ishmael had 12 sons. Of course, there's another generation in there. But it tells you in verse 16, "These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names by their towns and by their castles, 12 princes, according to their nations." And so these 12 sons of Ishmael became very influential. They had their own towns, their own castles. They had their own nations here, it says. So these were like family tribes that went out. And again, these were the basis of the Arab people. Verse 17, "And these are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. And he gave up the ghost and died and was gathered unto his people." So given the genealogy of his sons, gives their names. Most of them we don't know anything about. There is a place in Saudi Arabia called Duma, and there may be some connection there between this particular son of Ishmael and that particular region or that place. Now, I think it's important we understand also in verse 17 that I believe Ishmael was saved. What does Ishmael mean? It means heard of God. Because you remember later on when Ishmael, when he was about 17, and his mother, Sarah says, when Ishmael was mocking Isaac when he was at his weaning, when he was about 3 years old, and Sarah says to Abraham, they have to go. He's not staying here to be a pain in the side of Isaac. They've got to go. And it really grieved Abraham's heart, and God actually had to reveal to Abraham, do what Sarah says. So Hagar had to go. And so they were out in the wilderness again. Story of Hagar's life, really. But here she was out in the wilderness, and it talks about the lad, being over here, bow shot and all of that. And we're thinking to ourselves, well, this is just a wee boy, he's 3 or 4 years old. No, he was a teenager. He was an older teenager. And but it says that God heard the voice not of Hagar, but of Ishmael, and that was his name, heard of God. And I believe that Ishmael, like his mother, had his own relationship with God. He had his own encounter with God. I believe Ishmael was saved. And the Bible says here that Ishmael, after he died at 137, that he gave up the ghost and died and was gathered unto his people, just like Abraham. I expect to see Ishmael in heaven. A lot of his children, they're not going to be there, unfortunately. And the sons of Ishmael, just as Ishmael was in a sense, was persecuting Isaac right when he was 3 years old. It's always been true. And the sons of Ishmael, the Arab people, have been a thorn in the side of Israel ever since, even to this day. And really, a lot of these tribes and families have been all mixed up. We'll see later on with Esau that Esau basically is Edom, which is modern-day Jordan. And it is the Jordanians that actually have control of the Temple Mount. Did you know that? King Abdullah, he has to talk to Netanyahu about what's going on right now with the Temple Mount, because and it's never reported on here, but if you go on the Temple Institute on Facebook, you'll get all those reports that has been happening in recent weeks. Really sort of dovetail right in with our study on Ezekiel. But Jordan, these are the sons of Esau, the sons of Ishmael. These are all cousins in a sense of Jacob, of Israel, and yet they are the enemies of Israel. But Ishmael himself was a saved man. So, verse 18 says, "And they dwelt from Havilah unto Shur, that is before Egypt, as thou goest toward Assyria. And he died in the presence of all his brethren." And so it talks about again to the east, and really to the east of Israel, from Egypt all the way to Assyria. There's a trade route that runs all the way up there. And the sons of Ishmael would have been to the east of Israel, and I think eventually ending up in Saudi Arabia, the Arab people. Okay, so point number 6 then. We're going to move now to Isaac and Rebekah, and Esau and Jacob. So in verse number 19, it says, "And these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begot Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian of Padan Aram." And the word Padan, or Padan, simply means the plain. And you'll notice that if you watch closely about this ISIS thing, they talk about Syria and even Iraq as being, their name for it is Aram, and that's the old ancient name for Syria, is Aram. And of course that's where Abraham's family came from, Syria into Iraq. The modern boundaries that's not the ancient boundaries. That land was divided up, after the Ottoman Empire, between the British and the French and so on. So, and that's why Saddam Hussein was, that's why he invaded Kuwait, because he didn't recognize that border. He thought that was all part of Iraq, and that's really what started all this mess, as far as these modern times with the wars over there. So anyway, it's called Aram, and so the plain of Syria, the plain of Aram. Bethuel, the Syrian of Padan Aram, the sister to Laban, the Syrian. And Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife, because she was barren, and the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. It's interesting, a lot of these patriarchs, if you consider Abraham. Abraham had a walk with God, a walk of faith that was maturing through his whole lifetime. He was tested many, many times. Many of Abraham's tests he failed. The big test was, of course, Genesis 22, sacrifice your only son Isaac, and he passed that test. But you can see the maturing process in Abraham's life, and there were difficult times. There was famine in the land, goes down into Egypt, he failed that test. But when you come to Isaac, there's not really a whole lot said about Isaac. It's almost like Isaac got a free pass. But there were tests in Isaac's life, and one of the tests was he gets married when he's 40. Do you know when he has his children? 20 years later. So for 20 years, Rebekah was barren. And so Isaac went before the Lord, and in verse 21, Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. So the Lord answered his prayer and gave him twins, He's exceedingly able to give exceeding abundantly above all that we could ask or think. The Lord, provides for us. And so here come the twins. But, verse 22, the children struggled together within her, and she said, "If it be so, why am I thus?" And she went to inquire of the Lord. So she falls pregnant, and it's like a war going on inside her. Now, babies are different. Even before they're born, they're different. Babies have their own personalities before some children in the womb are very placid, and very, there's no issues. But I think that was our Andre. Leslie thought he was scribing his name on the inside on the walls. He was putting graffiti on the inside. He was just, he was kicking and doing, when Jennifer with her twins, she could find them turning and trying to get, one was trying to get more space than the other one. And that's an amazing thing. Now, we don't ever remember any of that before, obviously, we're born, but, we don't remember probably the first 2 or 3 years after we're born either. But we were still real persons, and people are real persons even before they're born. Amen. They're just not globs. And so when people have abortions, they're killing people. There's many things that, when Mary came in before Elizabeth, the babe leaped in her womb. She was pregnant with John the Baptist, and John leaped in her womb. Why was that? And here we have these two babies that are fighting in the womb, and she says, what in the world's going on here? And it so alarmed her that she went before God to inquire of God about it. In verse 22, the last part, it says, and if it be so, why am I thus? What's going on here? So she went to inquire of the Lord. 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. Now that was a prophecy right there. God revealed to Rebecca what was going on. Obviously she knew there was something strange about this. And he says the reason there's so much struggle going on in your womb is because you've got not just 2 babies, you have 2 nations and 2 different kinds of people. And there's going to be friction. And normally the eldest would have the birthright, and the younger would serve the elder. That was just the natural custom. But God reverses it here. He says that the elder will serve the younger. And Rebecca remembered that. So look at verse 24. And by the way, verse 26, Isaac was 70 years old when she bare them. So that's how we know there was 20 years that went by. She was barren. Okay, so point number 7 then, Esau and Jacob. Verse 24 says, and when her days were delivered, her days to be delivered were fulfilled. Behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red all over and like an hairy garment. And they call his name Esau. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 70 years old when she bare them. And this, to me, it's quite a picture of this, because the first baby comes out, he's all hairy. Now, we don't know the extent of this, but he had not just a full head of hair. He had hair on his back, hair on his arms, hair on his legs. He was hairy all over. The word Esau, okay? But not only was it hair, it was red hair. Your papa, you would say in Ireland. And the name for that is Edom. It's very close to Adam, right? Adam means red. Why was Adam named red? Because he was made out of the clay. So Adam wasn't a white guy. He wasn't a black guy. He was a red guy. And Esau was a red guy. And that's why his offspring was called Edom. And there was another reason here. It also talks about the red pottage that he had, the red lentils. And I guess it was maybe that story went around. And so anyway, Esau's name, his nickname was Red. And so that's Edom. And so Edomites, if you picture Israel, the Sea of Galilee, Jordan River, Dead Sea, where you have the Dead Sea, right to the right-hand side of that, the eastern side of the Dead Sea, that's Edom. Okay? And that's the modern state of Jordan. And then you have Jacob. And he's, so Esau comes out, right? And they're pulling him out, and there's a hand connected to Esau's heel. Is this not a picture or what? And Jacob has a hold of his heel. It's kind of like he's pulling him back in again. They fought right through the whole birth and everything. I mean, Jacob had a hold of Esau's heel, and he's saying, you're not coming out, I'm coming out. And he's, in a sense, pulling the back. They had this rivalry right from the womb. It's incredible. But Jacob comes out last, and Esau is the elder. Now the word Jacob means caught by the heel or supplanter. And it has the idea, one who comes from behind the wind. So it's kind of like, Esau's up here and Jacob's back here, and old Jacob's got a hold of his shoulder and he pulls him back so that he can be first. And that's the idea that you have here with these babies. So Jacob means one who takes the place of, supplanter. That's what it means. And of course what he is doing, he's going to take the place of the firstborn. The younger will rule over the elder. The elder will serve the younger. And so Jacob is going to take the place of the firstborn. And so that's what Jacob. Under number 7, the last line there, it says, Isaac loved Esau for venison. In fact, if you go down, look at verse 27. It says, the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man, dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison. Do you think that's a good motivation for to love anybody? But Rebekah loved Jacob. Now, I was doing some research on this. Usually when we talk about this, we're thinking of Esau. He's the he-man. He's the jock. He's the guy, he's the hunter, the mighty hunter. He's the outdoors guy. He's got the camo on all the time, And old Jacob, he's the sort of wimpy boy over here. He's the mommy's boy. And he's always in the house, and he's maybe a little effeminate or something. And we get this sort of picture of these two men. But something, if you really study this out, that's a false picture. First of all, when it talks about Jacob being at the house, it's not that he's in the house. Who's going to look after the flocks? It's he's in the field too, but he's feeding the flocks that are around the home, okay? But when you look down at verse 27, it says, the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man. Let me talk about Esau first of all. It says he was a hunter. Why did he need to hunt? Did they not have sheep and animals and they eat around? I mean, they were shepherds basically. So why would he need to go hunt something? Basically because he wanted to. And because Rebekah could make a lamb's meat taste just like the venison, because that's exactly what she did with Isaac. She made this lamb's meat to taste just like Esau's venison. You remember Jacob brought it in. Old Isaac couldn't tell the difference. So what's the big deal about Esau? And to be honest with you, when you really study this, when it talks about him being a cunning hunter, why did he have to be a cunning hunter? Because it wasn't like they were overrun with animals. He had to go really looking for these things. And it wasn't that they needed it, because the meat was there with the flocks and the herds that they had. I'll tell you what I came away with. Basically a playboy. He wanted to do his own thing. Didn't matter what the responsibilities were at home with the flocks and the house and everything. He was out there doing his own thing. He wanted to be a man of the field and go hunt and do his own thing. He was a man of leisure. And let me show you something else. Look over at Hebrews for a minute. In chapter 12, I'm not going to get to all of this right now. I just want to show you this. The kind of guy that Esau was. In Hebrews chapter 12, 13 and through 17, it says, follow peace with all men and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord, looking diligently lest any man fail of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble you, and thereby many be defiled. He's warning about certain kinds of people. Verse 16, lest there be any fornicator or profane person as Esau, who for one morsel of meat sold his birthright. Now, notice how it described. It says that he was a fornicator, a profane person. When you think about it, and this will maybe come out later on in some of the studies, but Esau married two Canaanitish women who were an absolute grief of mind, the Bible says, to Isaac and Rebekah. They were an absolute pain. These daughters of Heth, these daughters, they were Hittites, they were daughters of Canaan. In other words, basically old Esau saw what he wanted and took it. He was a fornicator. But when it came to Jacob, he waited. He had to go all the way back to Laban and to get, well, it was after Rachel, but he ended up with Leah first, and then that was, he got tricked into that. But he just didn't see something and then take it. He waited for the right time and the right person. In other words, Jacob was under control, and I think Esau was out of control. So I think we need to get away from this idea that sort of, Esau is the hero and old, Jacob is the mommy's boy. Let's talk about Jacob. Verse 27, it says, and Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents. You know what the word plain means? And I have it down here under number 7 there. It means perfect. It means complete. It means mature. It means needing nothing. Do you remember in Job chapter 1 when God starts to describe Job? And here's how he describes Job. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and the man was perfect. That's the same word as plain. The man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. That's a very positive description of Job. And the same word is used of Jacob. Jacob was a man who was mature, who was complete, who didn't need anything. He wasn't like his brother, I'm telling you that. And we talk about the last part of this, and we're just touching on it, but point number 8 here, Esau sells his birthright. Let's just read it, because here what you have is an event that exposes who Esau really is. In verse 29 it says, and Esau came from the field, and he was faint, and Esau said to Jacob, feed me, I pray thee, with the same red pottage. Notice the colour red coming on again. For I am faint, therefore was his name called Edom, or red. In other words, he's tying the nickname red to the red pottage, as well as the fact that he was red-haired and so on. Verse 31, and Jacob said, sell me this day thy birthright. Now old Jacob was probably thinking to himself, this is a gag. He's coming in from the field, and Jacob's probably making food maybe for his daddy, maybe for his mommy, but he's got the pan on, and he's got these red lentils in there. Maybe there's an aroma comes off it smells really good. Old Esau comes into the house, and he's starving, and he says, give me a part of that pottage. And old Jacob's probably just chancing his arm here. He doesn't think really Esau's going to do this, but he says, sell me your birthright. I'll give you the pottage, you give me your birthright. And to his absolute shock and dismay, Esau says, okay. And Jacob, what? Let's read on. He said, behold, I am at the point to die. Well, that's a bit of an exaggeration. And what profit shall this birthright do to me? In other words, he did not value his relationship in the family and what that family tree meant and the messianic blessings and so on. It didn't have any value to him. Verse 33, and Jacob said, swear to me this day. And he swore unto him, and he sold his birthright unto Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink and rose up and went his way. Didn't think a thing about it. The last phrase, thus Esau despised his birthright. Don't want to tell you something, he didn't deserve it. He wasn't the right kind of man to represent the God of Abraham. He wasn't the right kind of man to be in the lineage of Jesus Christ, in that messianic lineage. And so Jacob was there. And I don't think, and by the way, God does not condemn Jacob for what he said here and for what he did here. It was basically Esau's fault for not valuing that birthright and basically selling it for a bowl of porridge. You know something, as we close, look at the last. Are we ever tempted to follow the bad example of Esau, to choose the temporal over the eternal? That's exactly what Esau did here. How many have sacrificed their reputation and character for a moment's temporary pleasure? You see, Esau traded eternal treasure for temporal pleasure. Treasure for pleasure. It's not a good trade. And thus Esau, may we ever value the things of God over the things of this world. We cannot take the eternal precious treasures of God and sacrifice them for temporal thrills. It's a disaster. And that's not the way Jacob was. But I'm telling you, Jacob was the man. And really the whole thing going on is she loved Jacob because of the promises of God. Isaac loved Esau. It's not a good motivation. So maybe when we read this again, you could look at it in that light and understand, I think, really the truth of that story. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your word. Pray you bless now this chapter to our hearts. Help us to learn the lessons it brings. Lord, indeed, help us not to trade treasure for pleasure. In Jesus' name, amen.